Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 134. As always, I'm going to play us in with a tune. As always, I'm going to play us in with a tune. All right, come on. Yeah.
Send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives need, to wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wild. Your new gods, sullen peoples, have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threats of terror, and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times make plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace, fill full the mouth of famine, and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's not that hidden folly, bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, not tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living, and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden, and reap his soul's reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard, the cry of those ye humor, are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy young God's praise. Come thou to search our manhood through all of thankless years. No age with dear bought wisdom, the judgment joy of years. Take off the white man's burden through all of thankless years.
And that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. Do go and check out his channel if you like good music from a male musician who is a bloke and not a woofter. Chris is your dude to go and check out. And he's also a new dad, by the way. Mitch, how are you going, mate?
Same old, same old.
As always. Is that like a Birmingham Midlands thing?
Assuming so, because it's common enough to say that around where I live.
Yeah, fair enough. I noticed people in the chat were asking, are you Mr. Hobbit? And we were talking about this before we started. So I thought I'd say to you, Mitch, please explain to people why you've got the Tolkien type avatar this evening.
Oh, it's because of that UK, like that British MOD statement where they said, oh, because of like weeds and shrubs are the reason why Ukraine isn't able to take any more land. And and I'm just thinking because the Ukrainians call the Russians orcs and they call Russia itself Mordor, I just thought, I'm going to take the piss by. This is why Ukraine needs gardeners. Like Ukraine should have just hired Samwise Gamgee to.
I mean, look, anyone who thinks that's the reason why 2 months of Ukrainian attacks in Ukraine have resulted in not a lot more than tens of thousands of dead and wounded Ukrainian sons, fathers, and brothers. The idea that is because the fields haven't been tended is like, that's probably the most pathetic take I've ever seen from Western commentators, to be honest with you. And like, I can't imagine what like the real British military guys looking at that thought about it. But obviously they didn't say anything, But, long grass and like a few bushes growing up in big fields, and Ukraine has big fields, by the way. But that sort of thing helps an assault because it gives you a little bit more cover. And it certainly doesn't do anything to reduce the amount of how fast infantry or armored fighting vehicles can attack. It's just absolute nonsense. And everyone knows it's absolute nonsense with the slightest understanding of military stuff. It's just crap. The fact of the matter is that the notorious British assault on the Somme in 1916, which did not last one day, but like weeks and weeks and weeks, the British actually ended up capturing a lot more land within that battle than the Ukrainians have so far.
I mean, it's what in the case of this offensive, it's like 0.2% of the land they plan to take off the Russians, and for that 0.2% of what they planned for, they lost 43,000 men, as well as at least like 30% of the Western-dominated equipment earmarked for this offensive. I mean, I'm not exactly an economist or logistician, but that sort of cost-benefit analysis does not bode well in the slightest.
No, look. There is no reason why Ukraine can win. They've got less men, they've got less armor, like in terms of tanks and armored flying vehicles. They have less artillery. The only possible slight advantage they have on the Russians is they might get slightly better intelligence from US satellites and drones and what have you, and Western aircraft. They might get a little bit better intelligence, but it won't be very much better because the Russians got their own satellites and their own aircraft. The Ukrainians have almost no air force left, and not very much air defenses in terms of anti-aircraft missiles, etc. The Ukrainians have no advantages whatsoever. How on earth do you think they're going to win? They're certainly not better trained. because I would say probably average Russian soldiers and average Ukrainians are pretty much the same. But either side has some elite forces which are a bit better, but that's neither here nor there. There is no advantage that the Ukrainians can use to win, and anyone who is saying there is just being insane. Militarily, they're just being insane.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this whole offensive. On one hand, sure, the Ukrainians are as I said, 0.2% of the land they originally planned to take, because they were planning on just storming through to Crimea, because for some reason Ukrainians are just able to just get through a crap load of fortifications alongside Crimea generally being really narrow to get into for an armoured assault from the mainland.
But I mean,
not to mention,
they haven't even, Mitch, as I'm sure you would agree, they haven't really even penetrated the first Russian line of defense. And in some places, the Russians have 5 lines of defense, and almost all of the areas they have 3 lines of defense.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the Ukrainians are getting to the point where they might just be about to reach a first line of defense, but even then, the areas they're making success in, I mean, just how many bodies do they have to go through to get to that point?
But apparently they sank a Russian ship the other day, which is not true. They didn't sink it; they only damaged it, and it wasn't even a warship.
I think I heard it was near a port, I believe. So I wonder would it be too shallow for it to properly sink.
No. I've watched several things on this now, and it's damaged, and the Russians are going to find it. It's going to take a while to repair it. But it wasn't a proper warship. It wasn't a frigate or a destroyer. It was like a merchant ship the Russians were using.
Yeah, and I've heard that apparently there was no one watching out for drone strikes or anything, which then again, it had a lot of warships around it, from what I've heard of it. So that's why they didn't post any lookouts. Perhaps they learned the lesson, but the Ukrainians are massively overblowing how much of a catastrophe it is. I mean, Visegrad. That Visegrad account on Twitter. I mean, do I need to say more about them? They've just been one of the worst purveyors of misinformation.
Everyone who follows or tries to follow this war, because we can only try to follow it because we're only getting information from both sides, and from both sides it's biased, obviously. But for anyone who's trying to follow this war, you have to realize that the real gains are all Russian, and the propaganda stuff is almost all Ukrainian. And you have to also realize there's loads of Western military and intelligence organizations pushing the Ukrainians, and that's aside from all the NAFO virgin fat blokes stuck in their mother's basements,
Yeah, it's kind of similar to the Spanish Civil War, where the Spanish Republicans were absolutely terrible on the battlefield, but their propaganda department was top notch compared to the nationalists.
Yeah.
But the thing about because that's the thing. I mean, the Spanish Civil War. I mean, it kind of has a similar dynamic to the war in Ukraine. The original phase of the war was sort of maneuver warfare, where the nationalists tried to zerg rush for Madrid, and they didn't get there. So it had to become like a grueling war where both sides just bleed each other dry. Because a lot of it was trench warfare. You had, Franco just exploited areas where the nationalists were weakest, punched there, took the land, and then moved on. I imagine that's what Russia's going to end up doing, is just, on one hand, there's no need to advance against the Ukrainians if they're just going to come to you anyway. If you can just kill them all off, what's the point? But then again, I feel like they're going to make the same. But then again, you also got to make sure they don't make the same mistake as what William Westmoreland did in Vietnam, in terms of overspurging on casualties and only focusing on attritional warfare, but not really focusing on anything else in terms of winning the war. So
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Mitch. Michael K, 19th century fan. Ukrainians hired an American T in the LGBTQ as a spokesfreak to troll about Gonzalo Lira. Yeah, I thank you for that, Michael, because I wanted to speak about this. If you see this absolute freak who is an American man who left his American wife and his American children to go to Ukraine to go and spurg for the Ukrainians. This is a bloke, this vile thing with the fake tits and all the rest of it. That's a man who left his wife and children in America to go to Ukraine to spurg for Ukrainians. I'm sorry, I want to vomit every time I see it, to be honest with you. I am not a big Gonzalo Lira fan, but Gonzalo Lira didn't do anything except speech stuff. So how come the American State Department aren't rescuing him? Which they really should, was the truth.
same reason why they got Victoria Newland working for them. So
For sure. Yeah. And she's vile, I agree.
I mean, there's a special spot in hell for what she's done in Eastern Europe between Ukraine and Russia. Like before 2014, those two countries got on pretty well. I mean, there was still some bad blood between the Western Ukrainians and the Russians, but most Ukrainians were, they wanted good relations with Russia. But there was no problem really between Ukraine and Russia up until 2014 when Victoria Newland and her buddies did a coup, basically.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Neocons, a lot of them. Pro-Israel neocons, a lot of them. But I mean, Steve makes the good point. I'm presuming he's American. Our government only rescues black lesbians who hate white people. Yeah, that's pretty much true, man.
Yeah, and also like there was that clip which I put in my Discord earlier of this troon basically going like national socialist mode about Russians. Like, oh, Ukrainian soldiers, they're humans. Russian soldiers are not. And I'm just sat there thinking, I mean, if I'm just imagining being a Russian soldier, you're watching some troon say that you're inhuman and that you deserve to die or whatever. How the hell does that not just persuade you to just join up for the Russian army and just bomb Ukraine or whatever? Or just
look, if I was a Russian, I certainly would. But when I look at Russian soldiers and I watch translations of their conversations and so on, they remind me of old-fashioned British soldiers back in the 1980s, basically. They're swearing at each other as soldiers do. And as far as I can see, they're fighting for their families and their country. And I don't think a man could do a better thing than that, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a similar dynamic to the Falklands War when you really think about it. It's
absolutely right. That's exactly what I would say. Thank you, Mitch. That's very true. Like when the British soldiers and Marines, etc., in the Royal Navy went down to the Falklands, they were rescuing British people who had been taken over by the Argentinians, who they didn't want there. And the Russians are doing the same thing in Ukraine. They are rescuing Russian people who didn't want to be taken over by the Ukrainians. 100% agree with you, mate.
Yeah, it's I was just responding to something in chat, but I don't. Well, on one hand, I'm thinking one of the main pushes of this war, you've got, of course, Victoria Newland, and you get all these sort of pro-NAFO types, and these NAFO types, whether they be the white, because I find it weird how you get white nationalists who support Ukraine, and we behave towards Ukraine in a similar to how leftists behave around stuff like COVID, net zero, all the usual buzzcraft.
Can I tell you what I think it is? I think it's the overly obsessed with the JQ question white nationalists who do that.
I mean, if you're going to be involved in the JQ, then you'd hate Ukraine more in a way because Putin, people say Putin's Jewish, there's a fault. Like the document we used to prove it
Which
is proven to be. Well, the document we used to prove it is a load of BS. I mean, it's been disproven.
But Zelensky certainly is. And he bought his parents an enormous mansion on the sea in Israel. So, I mean, you know.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you get Zelensky. I mean, that's the thing with them. The JQ can't really explain this war when you think about it. Because I'm thinking you've got, for example, that's why I don't really talk about the JQ in context of this war, because I'm thinking, okay, I mean, Russia, for example, isn't some like J-woke country. Like, they're not going there and being like full on Hitler on the Jews.
No.
But like, and it's like, because Putin, for example, he got on well with Israel because Israel's got like 500,000 or something like that Russian Jews.
Yes.
So that's why Russia doesn't want to go, like, as much as Russia will back a country like Syria, for example, they're not willing for their weapons to be used against Israel because they've got influence within Israel, same way that America's got influence in Israel. So
Yep, no, I totally agree. But I mean, also, the Russian Jews in Israel tend to be fairly conservative.
Yeah, I'm pretty. I mean, it's kind of like the Jew. I mean, I read somewhere like I think we talked about this last week where the Jews in Israel, they're becoming a lot more right wing over time because it's is it the Roe v. Wade effect, I think we call it, where the more liberal types, their birth rate is dwarfed by that of conservative, more right wing types.
Yep.
So over time, the conservatives tend to dominate, provided you don't, of course, you don't have mass immigration like we get in England. But like Israel, but then in the West, the Jews that we get here in the West generally all tend to be very liberal, like either the communists or
liberal lefties. Yes, absolutely correct.
Yeah, because the religious Jews, they'll generally tend to live in Israel, and so on. I mean,
we have some like really Orthodox Jews, like where I live in Australia. There are some in Melbourne, etc. But those guys tend to be pretty conservative, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's Golders Green we live. To answer.
Yeah, in London.
Yeah, I was going to say, military theorist. Yeah, there is technically a Jewish autonomous oblast in the Soviet Union. However, not many Jews went there. In fact, Ukraine has got more claim to that place than the Jews do. So, because more Ukrainians live there than Jews ever did. Because, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's because the climate just wasn't what they were looking for, or perhaps because they were so focused on Israel that they just didn't bother with autonomous oblast, despite Lenin earmarking the land for them.
Yeah, but they still have like Jewish museums and stuff there, because I watched a Bored and Bankrupt video when he went there like a while ago, and they still have like they do have a fairly high Jewish population and like museums and all this kind of stuff. Did you see that, Mitch?
I watched it like. I mean, this was before the war. When last time I
watched it was.
I remember.
It was before the war.
Yeah, I mean, from what little I remember, it was a Jewish museum, and there was some Jews who live there. But like the thing is, that autonomous oblast. I mean, because it was meant to be like a farming commune, pretty much for all the Jews.
Yeah.
But the thing was, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, all the Jews they decided to leave the former Soviet Union and go over to Israel.
Yep.
Hence why.
Yep.
Like, and in terms of a Jewish presence within Russia, it's much declined from what it was like back in like 1989 or whatever. So
fair enough. Alaman, how are you going, mate?
Yeah, could you?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. We're just talking about what's going on in Ukraine, obviously, but also like the various Jewish takes on what's going on, because you've got like, you know, Zelensky is obviously a Jewish Jew who bought his parents an enormous villa on the Mediterranean in Israel, as well as having an enormous villa in Florida and several enormous villas in other parts of the world, and a $2 million flat in London and all this kind of stuff. What's your view on that, Armour?
I have no idea on it, to be honest. I've never looked into it. This is really the first time hearing about it.
Yeah, I just find it interesting, you know. And look, unless you're a moron, Russia is plainly winning the war in Ukraine. You can only think Russia isn't winning the war in Ukraine if you are a moron. And not even a military moron, just a general moron. It's impossible to regard Ukraine as somehow winning there.
I'm sure. I think you, Mitch, posted it in the Discord, or I might have seen it somewhere else. But someone said that they've ramped up, like arms manufacturing in Russia enormously.
Yeah, from what I've heard, it's something like drones are being produced 24/7. Then you've got the tanks, which apparently I've heard it's like they produce more tanks in a month than they produced in the entire year of 2022 at like a monthly rate.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's like, because I mean, it's similar to the Germans in World War II. They invaded the Soviet Union, but then they were just like gobsmacked when they found out how much the Soviet Union produced in terms of tanks, artillery, you name it. So similar dynamic there.
Another thing that I noticed just recently is that, like, Russia has now made gay marriage illegal. Russia has also made trying to turn any under adult child, like anyone under, I'm not sure if it's 18 or 21, but it's certainly 18. You're not allowed to do that. No one can be trans in Russia under that age. Even if their parents want it, you're not allowed to do it.
Based.
100% based. 100% based. Yeah.
But on the manufacturing front, though, just not to drag it back to that, but I mean, you said about World War II. Of course, the Russian tanks produced in World War II were designed to be something they could throw out very quickly, and could be maintained easily in the field as well because they had issues. But the modern stuff that they're chucking out now is very sophisticated. It's, I'm not sure if I could say it's quite up to a Western standard, but it's still a very high standard. The fact that they're chucking it out so quick, the fact that they're managing to, put this stuff together so fast and ramp up their manufacturing whilst the West has largely been against them and trying to stop them from developing this manufacturing base is absolutely insane. It's kind of a testament to them, to be fair.
Yeah, 100%. And like a T-90M, which is the latest Russian tank actually in service, it's got 125 millimeter smoothbore gun, and most of the stuff you would expect a modern tank to have. Is it as good as the very latest American or German tank? Maybe, but it's certainly better than the older tanks that from Germany and America and Britain that Ukraine is getting. It's at least as good as those and probably better than most of them. The other thing I would say is I watched a short video earlier today that Russia is now I think it's the 10th or 11th biggest economy in the world. And it's either one below or one above Japan. Did you see that, Mitch?
I saw people on Twitter going, like, in terms of like purchasing power parity. I mean, I don't fully understand what that means. I'm going to guess off the name anyway. It's like 5th largest economy in the world, and it's surged ahead of the UK as well as Germany.
Yeah, like UK, I think is number 9 or 10 now, something like that.
Yeah, and something I think Germany is like 6th or 7th, from what I remember.
Germany is just below Russia, I believe. Japan is just above Russia. But interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's kind of like a because I saw like this clip about Rhodesia on Twitter yesterday, where it said the sanctions upon Rhodesia actually did more to harm countries like Zambia and Mozambique than it did hurt Rhodesia. So it's like a similar dynamic there, where Russia's doing well despite the sanctions, just like Rhodesia's did quite well economically in the 70s, despite the sanctions that the likes of the Zambians and other countries around them try to impose upon them.
I mean, look, if you're going to have modern monetary theory where governments just print money, and you can do that, how is Russia under a war economy where presumably like they want as many industrial workers as they can get, as many factories producing tanks and artillery shells and all the rest of the stuff you need for war? How is that not going to work?
Yeah, I mean, I do truly wonder at what times. I mean, for example, this war is kind of like a testing ground for like Western weapons, like drones, not just like for the West, but also for Russia as well. And it's like at the end of all this, it's going to be a position where, in any sort of hypothetical war between Russia and NATO, like Russia will actually fare better because they know what works and what doesn't. Like, I mean,
Well, I
it's
mean,
still
look,
sure.
none of the Western weapons sent to Ukraine so far, although let me make this clear because I don't think people always realize it. Like a Leopard 2 tank or a Bradley fighting vehicle are not all the same. And the same for the Challenger 2 tank sent to Ukraine from Britain. These weapons are not the latest, best, and most modern versions with their full armor packages. They're not. And the Brits in particular made sure that the Challengers sent to Ukraine did not have their full modern British armor packages on them. Because why would you allow the Ukrainians to use those? Then they're going to get captured by the Russians, and the Russians are going to reverse engineer them. You're just not going to do that, are you? Unless you're a
we sent them a Storm Shadow. We sent the Ukrainians Storm Shadow missiles. One of which got captured,
we did,
fully intact.
Totally a mistake. Totally a mistake. I totally agree, mate, and totally a mistake. But like when you see these Bradleys and German Leopards and what have you being destroyed by the Russians, they're not the most modern versions. But I'm not saying for a minute that if you replace the same number with the most modern versions, the Ukrainians would suddenly win. No, they wouldn't. They'd probably have slightly less losses, but they still wouldn't break through.
I mean, if it's getting as bad as like losing 43,000 men in like 2 months, I mean, it's like, I mean, slightly fewer is still pretty bad.
Yeah, so, exactly. There is no way Ukraine can win this war. There is no way they can win it. No possibility whatsoever. All that's happening in this war is that America, Britain, and the rest of the West is allowing the only people who are being claimed are the Ukrainian sons, fathers, and brothers. They're being claimed. And America and Britain and the West will fight to the last Ukrainian bloke.
Yeah, I've heard like I've seen I can't remember where I've seen it from, but they reckon that the Ukrainian birth rate has dropped so low it's even below 1 child per woman. Like it's getting that bad in Ukraine there, where the birth rate's just completely crashed.
Well, I mean, what is it? 15-20% of Ukrainian women have moved overseas anyway, and something like the same amount of Ukrainian men have been killed or maimed.
I mean, it's what? So they reckon that somewhere between 20,000 to 50,000 amputations have taken place in the Ukrainian armed forces. So, like, they use, and a matter of confirm, like between 20 to 50,000. If you were to take 50,000 amputations and then you extrapolate back to go, okay, well, in the First World War, it was something like we suffered 1 million dead with like another 250,000 who had to have some sort of amputation. Then, 50,000 times like 4 doesn't bode well for Ukraine. Like, you're talking like 200,000 dead, according to that, if you're going off for amputations alone. And then you've also got the fact that, it's even get a lot of these Western articles that go, the longer that Ukrainians live outside of Ukraine, the less chance there is of them returning.
Which is also, yeah, no, 100%. Look, I'm sorry. I think Russia is fighting for the right cause in the Russia-Ukrainian war, but I do feel sorry for the Ukrainian men who are being slaughtered in this war to fight for American and British neocons and globalists. I do feel sorry for them in that regard.
Yeah, it's like you get back with the tranny who, for example, just posts insanely bloodlustful comments on social media that if you and I were to post about, I don't know, let's say the blacks in South Africa or whatever, you and I would get banned. But then this tranny can just go for
within 10 minutes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just what I mean. I don't even get what world we live in where we literally have troons just like going over to Ukraine, becoming an international spokesman, as well as just going full on like I don't know what the word I'd come up with. I mean, chutzpah is underrating it by a significant margin. So I don't know what word you use to say for it. But I mean,
well, look, all trannies are mentally ill men, but a mentally ill man who leaves his American wife and his American children to go across to Ukraine to be a tranny in Ukraine, that's even worse if that is possible. If that is possible, which I'm not sure.
Who the hell are you talking about?
Oh, you, the guy who went on about Gonzalo Lira.
Sarah Ashton's Civillo, the thing calls itself.
Right.
Like,
it's an American tranny who left its American wife and its American children, went across to Ukraine and said, I'm going to be a tranny for Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's...
Oh, that's weird.
And it's not just that, I mean...
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just that, I mean, all he does is just post about how much he hates Russians, basically. Like, it's like in a similar way to how Hollywood behaves when like Germans or Boers or Russians or just any group of hate. That's pretty much the entire gist of it. But like,
yeah, 100%, Mitch. But yeah, look, Ukraine's not winning the war; they're losing the war. Russia's doing all right. If you don't understand that, then you don't understand anything about like what's going on in the modern world, I guess.
I mean, aside from the Ukraine war, we've possibly got another war going on in West Africa. And
we'll
if that happens...
Mitch, we'll get on to that in a minute. Yeah. But before we do, because I don't want to make this whole stream about Russia versus the world, Adam, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up?
Only maybe this thing you wanted to talk about, the little thread I started on Twitter, sort of by accident almost.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. Look, Adam did I don't know if Adam started, but someone did. But it was I think it was Crossington, wasn't it?
Yeah, Clossington, yeah.
Yeah, Clossington did a post on Twitter where he said that if America leaves Europe now, all the European countries are fucked, and they're finished, and we don't realize how important it is for America to stay in Europe. I'm sorry, that's bullshit as far as I'm concerned. If America leaves Europe now, and God please will they, Britain and other European countries will have to start spending enough on defense, which we do not in any way, shape, or form at the moment. And if we spend more on defense, and for example, the British Navy, instead of having 16 frigates and destroyers, has, I don't know, let's be wild and say 50, Britain could suddenly start having an independent foreign policy.
Well, like on the topic of like America dominating Europe, I mean, it's kind of like how the Soviet Union dominated Eastern Europe. Like,
Yep.
When the Soviet Union pulled out their troops, that's when you saw East Germany, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria just topple their communist governments and just turn their back on communism. In the same way, you know, if any European country like Britain, I mean, I think it was like Nick Griffin who once said, if Britain were to vote in the BNP, we'd get bombed straight away by the Americans because they could not tolerate anyone.
Well, I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a second. But
I do.
No, I
I
don't think we would. But yeah, like I want a Britain with a 50 major warship Royal Navy and a strong enough armed forces that Britain can say to the Americans, well, yeah, all right, we agree with you on this, but we don't agree with you on that, and have our own foreign policy. Well, I'm not totally against some sort of American alliance. I'm just saying Britain should be strong enough, which it is not at the moment, to be independent from some of the Americans' views.
I mean, it wasn't really about independence, though. Like, Cosington's post was that Europe got itself indebted to America fighting World War I and II. And then he said...
The Americans used us. Yeah, absolutely, they did.
And then he said, we don't produce any enough children, which is the same for America, and rely on American military protection. Now, the reason I kind of brought this angle up is because AA made a stream a while back about the whole America versus Anglo question thing.
Yep.
And on that, Paul Fahrenheit, who I usually don't have a problem with, but I think he was getting a bit fed up with the argument. I can't remember the exact quote, but he basically turned around and said, well, if Europeans didn't want, you know, America to be part of the American empire and rely on American protection, they should just vote it out or vote against it or vote for their own defense,
which they generally do.
Well, yeah, this is kind of the silly thing about it. Like, first off, right, like, why is anyone on the cigar stream arguing for democracy? It's like, it's sort of absurd. But even when you look at it, like, I had a quick double check. Even if you go to the most radically anti-defense Labour manifesto ever, which was 2019,
yep,
it doesn't say anything about them cutting the military budget. In fact, it says.
Although they did.
Yes, although they always would, right? I'm not disputing that, but they don't say they will. Yeah. They say the opposite. In fact, they in that 2019 manifesto, they admonished the Tories for cutting personnel, and they say that they pledged to stick with the 2%, which is of course the minimum for NATO membership. And it's like that's the most radically sort of anti-defense manifesto you'll find, and that's what it says. And people seem to, I don't know, it's kind of funny. It's like on the right, people seem to still fall into this trap sometimes where they confuse rhetoric for action. I heard this recently on the Lotus Eaters. Obviously, Dan the man has that Brokenomics series. I think it's the one behind the paywall. But he had a guy on there. They were talking about investing, and they got into a conversation about nuclear energy, and they were saying like, "Oh, the public is against nuclear energy," and it's like, no, it's the complete opposite way around. That's normal. The public is actually kind of for nuclear energy. It's the politicians, the political class that's against it.
Yep. 100%.
And this is why Boris Johnson will literally campaign on an idea of a nuclear renaissance, but then doesn't puts very little money into it. And it's kind of the same thing with defense. Generally speaking, the public is actually very receptive to the idea of having our own sort of well-funded, well-maintained sort of defense.
Yep.
And you could kind of see this as well. Like we've just had this conversation about the Ukraine war. And it's like in the UK, I actually think that the public's starting to go a little bit cold on the whole support Ukraine thing.
Yeah, me too.
Most of the support seems to still be amongst boomers, though.
Yeah, they are gradually realizing this is not a winning strategy.
Yeah, although largely boomers are very much still supporting Ukraine.
The moron boomers, yeah.
Well, yeah, but still an overwhelming majority of that generation. I think it's the only generation that enjoys that high percentage of support for Ukraine. But and it's like, but early on, one of the ways in which the media knew to pull on the sort of strings of people to get them to support this thing was to push the idea of like the Red Terror coming from the East. You literally had these sort of moronic people who should have known better saying, "Oh, if we don't stand in Ukraine, we'll be next," which is obviously absurd.
He's next door to Britain.
Yeah, like as soon as they take the Donbass, they'll be firing mortar cannons straight into East Kent. I tell you, but it's just. But of course, the thing is, they know that works. They know that ultimately people do care about that old-fashioned defense. People do worry about the idea of being vulnerable to foreign powers. People care about defense. Ultimately, they care about well-funded militaries. They care about and they care about it from other angles, of course, because even Jeremy Corbyn used to push on the angle of using the military to create jobs domestically. So yeah. I mean, this thing that Americans
manufacturing plants for the military, whether it be armored fighting vehicles, aircraft, or warships, provide jobs in Britain. 100%. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't understand why people, because it isn't just Americans. Lots of Europeans will say this to you too. Lots of Brits will say this to you as well. I don't understand where this argument comes from that European powers are, or European peoples are not for their own defense.
It comes from our so-called, in inverted commas, elites like Rishi Sunak, etc., preferring to rely on American defense than British defense for Britain, which of course is ridiculous, because if push comes to shove, British defense will actually defend Britain, whereas American defense of Britain will only defend Britain up to the point where it suits America.
But why would they do it though? This is the thing. Why are the political classes against this? What is it purely financial, which doesn't seem to make much sense because they do not care about the finances at any other time?
No, it's world government. It's globalist world government run by the Americans.
Yeah, you can't have militaries in Europe getting to the size where they could potentially be a thorn in the side of America, I suppose. The American State Department and the government at large.
Alan, the Royal Navy today has, I think, 16 or perhaps 17 destroyers and frigates, and about 6 SSN hunter-killer nuclear-powered submarines. At the time of the Falklands War in 1983, Britain had 70 destroyers and frigates and at least 15 hunter-killer SSN nuclear-powered submarines. Now, if you've got that many warships, you have a much bigger influence on the Americans, for example, than you do with what Britain has today. I mean, this is just like plain obvious common sense, because the Royal Navy in those days was probably well over a quarter of the American Navy, and today it's not even 10%.
Yeah.
So, I was going to say, in context of, let's say, the Royal Navy, I don't know about so much like, I mean, to be fair, we've had our own small arms factories like BSAF and whatnot. But in terms of the Navy, I mean, surely.
Every single one of them dead now, by the way, Mitch.
I was going to say, like, you think, given that, because you often, even when we've decolonised and we're practically just like relegated to what we are now, you'd think we still have like a burgeoning military industry, given that. Because, for example, how much shipping goes to the English Channel? Something like at least 80% of the world's shipping has to go around our coastline. So you'd think we would have a powerful Royal Navy, given that role we've got.
Well,
to, I mean, guarantee shipping lanes and whatnot.
It's not even that much. Britain is an island nation. It still depends on maritime imports. We have to be able to not only defend the English Channel and the North Sea, but Britain also has to be able to send ships to the Persian Gulf, for example. We have to be able to do that, because if we don't, any enemy of ours, even if they can't invade the place, can starve us to death.
Yeah, I wanted to comment. I just think it's like you have because we were known as a workshop of the world at one point. We had burgeoning shipyards, not just in Northern England, but also in Scotland, like up the Clyde and so on. In terms of the aerospace industry, I mean, Frank Whittle was an Englishman who invented the jet engine, or rather perfected it.
100%.
And then we just sold it off all to the Yanks because we
gave it away to the Russians in 1946. The MiG-15 was powered by a basically British engine that the British Labour Party gave to Russia in 1946. It's like crazy, but yeah, true. But yeah, I totally agree with all this stuff. Alice Little in the chat says, doesn't technological advancement create a downsizing effect on the military like everything else? No, it doesn't. So you're wrong about that, Alice. Cost prohibition. Look, if you build, and I said this on Twitter earlier, if you build a class of 6 warships and only 6 warships, those 6 warships will be vastly more expensive per unit than if you built a class of 12 warships, which will come down greatly in price just because you're producing the same things many times.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, doesn't quantity have a quality of its own, though, when you think about it?
No, it's not that. Yes, it does. Absolutely, it does, Mitch. But the point I'm trying to make is if you build a class of 6 warships, like Britain often does these days, 6 or 8, those warships will individually cost you vastly more money than had you built a class of 12 warships, which is what Britain used to do if you go back into the 1980s. And because you're producing not 6 radars, but 12, not 6 gun systems, but 12, not 6 of everything that you need for those warships, but more. And the more of them you produce, the cheaper they become per unit. And Michael K, 19th century fan in the chat, makes a good point that the R&D costs are absolutely through the roof for producing a class of 6 warships versus producing a class of 12 or 16 even.
Yeah, on the topic of like Europeans like funding their own defense, I mean, I think like the only country I can think of would be the exception that would be Germany, because they're very battered people. I don't know if Germans would fund their own defense against and like indigenize themselves against Americans for like, defending themselves. But aside from that, I mean,
it's not, I don't get this. What you're saying it's against Americans. It's not. It's like I'm entirely in favor of having some military alliances with America. What I would like, though, is Britain to have more independence in terms of its foreign policy. I wouldn't say, like, I wouldn't for a moment make America our enemy, but I would say, okay, we'll support you in this, but we won't support you in this. We might support you in that, but we won't support you in this. That would be what I would like to see happening.
Why does France buck the trend?
Well, it only kind of does, though.
But it does.
Well, it does in terms of rhetoric. It does in terms of spending a huge amount of money on protecting its own aircraft industry. But does it really? I'm not sure about that, mate.
Well, I mean, it does, because they do spend more than most of the other NATO members outside of like America.
Yeah, no, they do. But like when you look at what the French actually do in terms of policy, and also they have one aircraft carrier, which only occasionally is operational. When it's operational, it gives the French like a quite strong arm, but it's only operational sometimes. But yeah. Alice Liddell was saying France is less than the Anglos. That's why. No, it ain't. I'm sorry.
I don't know.
Well,
I mean, the French
it's less cut if you think that Macron is more pro-French than Sunak. And maybe he is, because, I mean, Sunak, after all, was an Indian banker.
Right, but Sunak hasn't created these cuts. These cuts have been here for a long time. And the trend of downplaying the military and shrinking all European armies to this small size has been going for a long time.
You don't need to do it if your overlords are supposedly.
But Sunak didn't do it. That's my point. Like, it's not about Sunak or Macron. It's not even about any elected politician. It's about the larger political machine at play. You know, it's often about the unelected people. And it's like, why is it that, I mean, France kind of has this kind of excuse, don't they, in that they still operate very heavily in their former colonies. But then you have to ask how they got away with that too. I mean, I think it's also just been harder for like for the arms of the American empire to sort of infiltrate non-English speaking countries.
Oh yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe that's true.
I mean,
I think France is generally in a slightly worse state than UK, but only slightly.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons, but not on this one. It's one of the few places that still kind of slightly holds out on this, and they still, their military still holds a large sway. They still operate kind of largely unimpeded all over the place.
I mean,
Wiggles in the chat says largest nuclear arsenal in Europe is France. That's not really true, mate. France and Britain have a roughly similar nuclear arsenal, but roughly similar.
But isn't France is independent and ours isn't?
No, the British one is independent. Do you really think, Armand, that a Royal Navy captain is going to fire a nuclear missile because the American president told him to? Because I don't.
Right, but don't we need tech from the Americans to keep it running?
Very little these days, but even so, I honestly, I don't think there's any chance that a British captain of a nuclear submarine would fire a nuclear missile without a direct order from the British government. And I hope and pray they wouldn't even do so from someone like Sunak. But that's just it, of course. But yeah.
Yeah, see, Sunny Jim in the chat has brought up about Trump. I mean, that was like Trump came out and specifically said that Europe should pay its own way. But from Trump, unlike some of these people, Trump wasn't saying that that it was unpopular in Europe. Trump was just saying that Americans shouldn't be paying for it.
Oh, no, I 100% agree with Trump. I think America should largely withdraw from Europe and make the Europeans, including the Brits, spend more money on defense, which we need to do.
I mean, in context of the Germans, it's like, for example, they have this retarded idea that, trade. If you trade with other countries, then ideas will spread and peace will dominate. So, for example, because Germany trades a lot with Russia, for example, or did before the war, that Russia would in time embrace democracy like the Germans did, and that they would never go to war with anyone else in Europe. And it's like, well, that's kind of fallen flat on its face, because that's the thing. Like, trading with a country doesn't mean you suppress their desire, like suppress any chance of them going to war. So that's one reason why the Germans were the way they were in terms of political elite. I don't know about the people, because the people are very sort of battered down compared to the French, especially. Even compared to us, like the Germans are just really cooked where defense matters lie.
I
was going to say on topic of like France. I mean, they're really cooked on immigration. Like, I mean, their concept of identity is, even De Gaulle, for example, said, "Oh well, a Frenchman can be any color. It's just white Frenchmen have to have priorities." Like, so he kind of admits that a black man can become a Frenchman. It's just a white to get more priority. So,
Mitch, was that before or after he abandoned Algeria?
I don't know. I don't know. The quote never had a date on it.
Algerians, yeah.
Well, I've never saw the date to the quote, so I couldn't tell you. But I mean, I'm not exactly shilling De Gaulle. I'm just saying, even like in De Gaulle's time, I mean, even before like mass immigration, the French identity has, because it's a very revolutionary one, it's more fragile compared to the British one, where it's been a continuum since like the time of Alfred the Great.
All I was trying to make my point there, Mitch, was that like, had the French nationalist dude been able to assassinate De Gaulle, I would have said good on them, but that's just me. But because they were trying to keep Algeria part of France, which I think would have been a good thing. But that's just.
I mean, the thing is, like, the northern coastline, sure, yeah, but I mean, but the southern half of the country where the Tuaregs are, do you really want to lord it over Tuaregs? I mean, they're more of a pain in the arse.
Why not? Why not?
What would France have to give up?
I'm happy to lord it over most people, to be honest. But yeah, I think De Gaulle was a traitor to France when he gave up Algeria.
Yeah, I don't really know much about De Gaulle, to be honest, but I mean, given he's French, yeah, I'm automatically going to dislike him. So,
yeah, look, like I said, I think when De Gaulle gave up Algeria as part of France, which it was, I think he was a traitor. I'm sorry. Exactly the same way as I regard the Labour Party in the 1960s. They gave up most of the British Empire.
I mean,
they were traitors. I hated them. I do hate them.
I mean, it depends on what part of the empire. I mean, most of the African countries, I mean, why would I want to bother having them still be part of the country? Malta, for example. I wouldn't say no to keeping them part of the UK.
Yeah,
Do I
100%.
want to keep? Do I want to keep Ghana as part of Britain? No, I don't. Like, I mean,
Well,
I would have.
I'd sooner keep it part of the empire than allow Ghanaian people to come to Britain.
I mean, you say it's not really an either or. I mean, we're talking a hypothetical scenario where, let's say we had a base government, but we still were committed to sort of some sort of decolonization. Because let's face it,
No,
the empire.
no. You've got to stop, Mitch. I would never, ever be committed to some kind of decolonization. I just would have said, nah, fuck that, not going to happen.
No, I mean, a colony like Sudan, for example, like Adam says, I would have abandoned that because, I mean, what point is there in keeping that place? It's just literally just like a big desert that costs more than we get from it.
Yeah,
Same with India.
It cost more money. Yes, it did. I totally agree. But I'm a 19th century guy, so I would have said, what we have, we hold.
I'm going to disagree with you. I mean, I would have just kept on Rhodesia, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And as well as Malta.
Yeah.
As well as Malta, at the very least.
100,
I don't know about other parts of it. I don't know about Belize, because I don't really know much about Belize at all, in terms of the people there.
No, 100%. I would have kept the same places as you. I would have absolutely kept Rhodesia. I would have supported South Africa. I would have kept Malta. So yeah, absolutely same as you on that thing. But
Suez Canal, I forgot to mention, but yeah.
Yeah, and the Suez Canal was British, owned by the British government, which means to say the British people who paid for it with taxpayers' money. But you're not allowed to say that these days. But yeah, Alex Liddell was saying British imperialism was massive overextension. Depends how big your navy is, Alice. Really? Big enough navy, and no, it's not.
Well, it's like one could argue that Alexander the Great's empire was also overextended, but it didn't stop him from pretty much destroying the Persian Empire and also expanding into how far was it got into India, like Indus River or Hydaspes River or whatever it was?
Yeah,
river.
He definitely got into the northern part of India. He did.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the river name that the furthest his empire went to. I can't remember if it was Indus or the Hydaspes where he battled that
Indus,
Indian. Yeah, I can't remember if it's Indus or Hydaspes.
Sonny Kim, this is not true. We had to beg Canada to become independent in 1992. Absolute nonsense, mate. This was just I think you've been watching too many AA streams where AA is under the absolutely ridiculous idea that Canada until 1982 was still somehow a British colony. Canada became independent in the 1860s. Totally independent in the 1860s. This was just some royal warrant stuff. This is why many people on the right don't get things correct. They listen to people who don't know what they're talking about. And on this occasion, AA did not know what he was talking about. That thing in 1982 was something to do with like raw warrants and had to do with like if you could execute somebody and this kind of stuff. It was not a serious tie between Britain and Canada. Canada became a independent dominion in about 1867 or 1868, somewhere around there. And this was a minor thing. And AA just got that wrong, which he sometimes does. But yeah, fair enough. Adam, we're wandering all over the place now at the moment. What do you think?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I kind of said my piece on it. It's another one of those things where we're kind of powerless to fix it for the time being anyway. It's something that just might unfold on its own in the future, or something that we're going to have to change later. but yeah, I don't understand why. It's one of those funny things that people on the right will say a lot, like, oh, you have to like kill that last liberal inflection of yourself off, and it's like, well, you kind of still see this stuff in people, including the people that say this stuff in all the weirdest places. And yeah, it's something that people should bite back with when people say this. Maybe not bite back, like Closington was being very conciliatory, although he never responded to me. But yeah, people should just say, look, we're actually happy to pay for our own defense. In fact, these are popular policies in Europe generally.
Yep. The British Army, the Royal Navy, Royal Air Force, etc., Royal Marines are very popular in Britain. You won't find many normies who don't like them.
No.
Ashton Duke in the chat says Quebec was never really part of the Empire, the British Empire either, right? Yes, it was. And in the War of 1812, when the Americans 3 times tried to invade Canada, the Quebecois, the French descent people in Quebec, fought against them really hard on behalf of the British Empire. So there you go, Ashton Duke. Sorry, Mitch.
Well, I was going to say, first of all, de Gaulle, didn't he like say Vive Quebec or something like Vive Quebec Libre or something like that when he visited Canada? So
I'm sure the French had no power in Quebec whatsoever and never did.
Yeah. Well, secondly,
not since war anyway.
Secondly, with France, it's like just to add on to like whether France is like base or cooked or whatever. On the topic of the gender stuff, like the whole non-binary LGBTQ stuff, whatever. Yeah, but not as bad as us on that one because I think it's like because French is a Romance language, it doesn't have any concept of gender neutrality in it whatsoever. So there's no sense of they in the same way that we have it in English. So if you were to be like some sort of non-binary tard, there's nothing in the language to actually facilitate you calling yourself non-binary. So in actual like French language and administration, legal documents, you name it, there's no actual means for someone to identify as non-binary because it just doesn't exist in the language at all. So that's
I totally agree.
That's the only area really where, aside from defense and like in terms of like strong army in West Africa, that's the only other area where France does better than us, from what I know. So
also France runs a fairly big bit of South America still. It still has quite big colonies in the Pacific, like Tahiti, etc. So yeah, there are those things too.
Aren't like those colonies in the Pacific, aren't they just used for nuclear tests or whatever?
No. They run Tahiti, mate. Tahiti.
No, it's like some of these. Tahiti.
There are other places where they've done nuclear tests. So has America, so has Britain. But the point is, France has quite large colonies in the Pacific still. They have fairly large colonies in the Caribbean still. So does Britain. But they also run a fair amount of territory in South America.
Yeah, as I say, with the case of Tahiti, did they have? I thought Tahiti was, I won't say independent, but I thought they had something going where because they had like a rebellion back in the 19th century.
They're like all of the current British overseas territories, of which there are 14. They have self-government in their own area, but all of their foreign policy and defense stuff is run by the frogs. Exactly like the 14 British overseas territories, pretty much.
Yeah.
But France does still control quite a considerable part of South America. So, yeah. In fact, I think the French space program is largely based there. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Tahiti was like a special case because I'm pretty sure they had like a big rebellion back in like the 19th century or something.
Yeah, they've had
Well-
loads of, as Biaki is saying in the chat, loads of rebellions in those places, but it's French. The islands are run by the French. So you know, if you watch any of the Mutiny on the Bounty films, which are varyingly bad, but almost all of them are bad, that's Tahiti, and the French run that place to this day.
Yeah.
Biaki also mentions Reunion, which is quite close to Mauritius, which used to be British but isn't anymore. And then beyond that, you have the Seychelles, which is some islands I've been to, which also used to be originally French and then British. But Reunion is still another French island in the Indian Ocean. So I don't know what I can say. I can only give you guys geography lessons up to a certain point. And yeah, Michael K, 19th century fan, is correct here. There are two groups of islands actually off Newfoundland that are still French. Absolutely true.
Is that Saint Martin and I don't know the name of the other island?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Oh, Papillon. Oh, that was it.
Tomb of Arminius is correct about Seychelles. They are gorgeous. They started off as French islands. British took them, I think, during the Napoleonic Wars, and then they were British for ages. And if you go to the main town there, which I think still called Victoria, if I remember correctly, I went there years ago. There's a great big clock and statue of Queen Victoria. Yeah, and they are lovely. Very nice. But they used to be British originally. Sorry, they were French originally, then British, and now they're independent. And Port Victoria, Tomb of Arminius tells me, so there you go. Absolutely correct. Guys, can you speak for like 2 minutes between yourselves? Because I have to go to the door for a second.
Yeah, not sure what to cover now though.
I mean, the only other topic I could think of is like that possible. We're probably going to get another wave of immigration, like akin to these, like bigger than the Syrian civil war refugees, but this time
Because of
with
this Africa
West
situation.
Africa.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, Niger, this country that's possibly getting invaded, their mean age is like something like 20, and they've got the biggest birth rate in the world. So we're just going to get burdened immensely. So, which I don't even get how they have the highest birth rate in the world anyway. Because when you look up their country, it's one of the poorest in the world because it's mostly desert.
Yeah.
So
That's
I can
Morgoth's
understand
law for
Nigeria. Sorry.
That's Morgoth's law for you.
Yeah, I passed it on Twitter. You know, it's just like, you know, regardless of the situation we get, it's always going to be the same result, just more blacks and browns. So
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know. I mean, with Nigeria, I mean, that's also like a pretty big clusterfuck in and of itself. I mean, it's like 230 million people in Nigeria who are quite young, because I mean, they're going to get a lot of them into Europe as well if, let's say, the northern part of the country gets regularly raided by, let's say, Niger in some hypothetical war or whatever. So that's also going to burden us as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is the actual? Because I haven't really paid much notice to the Niger thing. So they've had a coup, and they are what the new people. Are they siding with? They're coming out in some sort of alliance with Russia or something.
Yeah, they're more. I mean, according to Wagner PMC, the coup, I thought it was just some sort of like Russia thing. No, it turns out. So the president was a half Arab, or like he was an Arab in a country where Arabs only make up like 0.5% of the population. So pretty much everyone hated him. The military get rid of him, and they're mainly made up of like the bigger ethnic groups, which are like Hausa people, I believe they're pronounced, which they make up a big proportion of like Nigeria's population. So it's like a very much a tribal thing going on there. But then you've got the French, who they just see this domino effect where Western Africa is just turning against them. They just want to stop it from happening. So that's why they're thinking of going to war. You also got uranium being a thing in Niger because they mine a lot of uranium for French nuclear. Not enough to like cripple French power, but more of a pain in the arse.
Yeah.
So that's another factor. But
so
I mean,
do you actually think France will actually go in there though? Because haven't they been in Mali since like forever at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we did get chucked out at some point because the thing was like the French, they were found to be supporting actually the Islamists covertly to prolong this forever war, so that they'd always be needed, quote unquote. So there's that, and then like France, I mean, they did have like military assets all over the place, like 1,000 men in Niger, well, they've all had to go home courtesy of the coup. So.
But they
like,
might,
in terms of,
they might come back, Mitch. I think, but we'll
see. Like the thing is, it all depends on if Nigeria is actually willing to go to war because their Senate has voted against it, but the president wants to go to war. So
it's not just Nigeria. Nigeria has easily the most powerful armed forces in that part of the world. But it's really down to the French. If the French are willing to commit the Foreign Legion there, which are the troops they will commit, and let's be honest, the French don't really all that much care how many Foreign Legion dudes get killed. But also, the French Foreign Legion is a very professional force which has almost totally rejected the feminization of the armed forces that has happened in most of the Western world. If they send those guys in there, Niger's fucked. They're not going to win. And even if they have, like, I don't know, 500 Wagner dudes helping them out, they're still not going to win.
Well, it's more of a guerrilla war, which turns into grueling, like, war where everyone suffers.
You can't fight a guerrilla war in the Sahel, which is it's basically very thin grassland with very few trees, shading into a real desert. It's not an ideal place to fight a guerrilla war at all.
I mean, you take the Tuaregs, who I mentioned earlier. I mean, they're basically just desert raiders. They're able to hide in the desert. Do you not think that
they used to go in on camels back in the day, and horses as well, back in the day, and do a raid on this farming village and then fuck off back into the desert? You can't quite do that in 2023 because of drones and satellites and everything else that we have these days. I think if the French have the political will to fight there, they can take Niger back. Whether they have the political will, I don't know, because I'm not a Frenchman.
But isn't this kind of cringe for Russia? I mean, why is it? Why do they look at this and say, "Oh yeah, Africa, this is a place we want to get tangled up with"?
Because I think, all right, and I'm not sure this is true, but what I think is this is a place they can cause France, who is one of the countries that is sending weapons to Ukraine, a lot of shit. I don't think the Russians think they can win there. I think they can just cause France a huge amount of bullshit there, and I don't blame them for that reason.
But this is kind of the thing I don't get. Like, whoever's connected to Africa, it's always just been a giant drain. I don't understand why. And the Chinese do this as well. The Chinese keep trying to get a foothold in parts of Africa too. And it's like, why? If they want to cause us trouble, they can do it without having to go there or make implicit alliances.
They can't as much as you think. Look, if Russia uses, say, 1,500 soldiers, which is not many, all right? If Britain sends 1,500 soldiers to Africa, which we have, I think, probably 3,000 soldiers in Africa at the moment, that's quite a lot of the tiny British army of, I don't know, 73,000 men we have these days. If Russia sends 1,500 Wagner guys or Russian soldiers to Africa, that's a tiny proportion of their force. Will they win in the end? Probably not. If the French have the political will to not allow them to, which I'm not sure about at the moment, but if they don't, they probably won't. But it's a mere 1,500 blokes from a Russian army which is 1 million men strong.
But it's just like, if America can go and cause color revolutions without ever setting foot in a place.
Well, I know they can't.
Russia doesn't.
There's always some Americans in that place. Always.
You're playing now, because the difference in scope between what America could do in one place with subversion and what Russia's having to do in Niger is quite different in scale.
But you have to have some men in Africa, in a Western style country like Ukraine, for example. You've got your embassy, and you have all your diplomats and all your CIA guys and all the rest of it. Those guys won't do you any good in Africa.
Right, but then why is China pumping the place full of resources and money?
Because they want bases and troops there eventually. They haven't got them yet, but that's what they want. I mean, they do have a base in Djibouti, apparently. Whether there's many ships based there, I have no idea, because the Americans also have a base there. And the whole place used to be French.
It just seems like liberal sensibilities leaking into their leadership to me. Everyone looks at Africa and thinks that they can turn it into something that will be useful to them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about China, but for Russia, it's because their population is, their birth rate because their birth rate's going to go down anyway, regardless of what they did, just because of what the 90s did to them. I can just imagine the Russian leadership are thinking, let's see if we can turn Africa into some sort of consumer base for our products or something. If, alongside, screwing over the West, that's kind of acting like a bonus towards them. But, it
won't work, though.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, a lot of the Russian leadership, like Putin, for example, they're Soviet boomers, so they won't have the same racial views as you or I, for certain.
I mean, in the end, we, after all those years, the West, did manage to turn them into a consumer base, but only by bringing them here and giving them money. That's the only way we were ever able to make it work.
Yeah. Look, the point I'm trying to make, which is a bit different to what you do to try to make, is that Tricky Woo points out Britain today has less than 78,000 men in our army. So, and there are at least 2,000 or 3,000 of those dudes in Africa, in various parts of Africa. But Russia has 1 million men in their army, and if they have 3,000 men in Africa, that's nothing. And if they lose, well, okay, they lose, so long as they cause an enormous distraction to France and the West. And France, like Britain, like America, like all of the NATO countries, has given away vast amounts of its weapon stocks to Ukraine. So if France has to fight a war in northwest Africa, They ain't going to be sending those weapons to Ukraine, are they? Because they don't have them. So I can see the point of view. If I was Putin, I would say, yeah, we can call it bullshit in French Northwest Africa. Let's do it. Because none of those weapons will go to Ukraine. It makes some sense. And if Russia loses there, well, Russia doesn't lose anything important to Russia. In the same way as, Ukraine is not a vital interest to Britain. It's just not. Who runs Ukraine makes no bloody difference to Britain whatsoever. And who runs French Northwest Africa doesn't really affect the Russians. If you can just see that, then you'll start to see where these things intersect. Tomb of Arminius is saying Djibouti is such a shell. Djibouti was a French colony to, I don't know, either the late 80s or the late 90s. I can't remember. And these days, there's both an American and supposedly a Chinese base there. But I bet the Chinese base don't have much on it. Because the Americans would wipe it out in a second.
I mean, Russia's got that planned base got out in Sudan. So it's kind of like a weird dynamic in that area where the Chinese, because the Russians, they want that base in Sudan because it's close to the Suez Canal, and also it's along that strategic Red Sea filtering out into the old Indian Ocean. China, I feel like we just do it just to subject Djibouti because I can't remember who said it, but debt trapping apparently is a Chinese strategy. Like they get these African countries into debt. If these countries default on their debt, then China just comes in and takes like a port or like a huge chunk of land or whatever.
Yeah, so, you are us this, that, and the other. 100%, they do that. Yes, they do.
I'm not really.
Seems like an expensive way to get ports and bases, though.
But if you're the Chinese Navy element, which is basically a regional navy that can't operate outside its area because it doesn't have enough supply ships and what have you, what else do you do to try and make your navy a world navy?
You get those bases at a better rate.
But all those bases are taken by somebody else. You see what I mean?
Right, but they're not giving you a naval base that is already occupied by like the Americans. They're going to let you build a naval base on their land for a fee,
which they did, which the Americans will destroy in 10 seconds if anything kicks off between America and China. And the Chinese.
What are the Africans going to protect the port then because you put them in a debt trap?
No, of course they're not.
I don't see where this conversation's going. Like, I know that China does this, but it's like, why would they even bother? It seems like such a waste of money.
Because they want their warships patrolling the Gulf,
and they can do that with this massive 4D construction of money funneling to Africa.
No, they can't. They can't.
They can.
No, they don't have either the supply ships or the experience of using them.
Africa aren't giving them that stuff though, so
no, they're not.
It's still a bad trade.
No, they're giving them bases,
but they can get the bases. This is what I'm getting at. They don't need to go through this massive convoluted thing to get bases. It's more than that. The Chinese do it because they think that they can turn Africa into something.
I don't.
Because to be honest, as well, they don't like even though they've done.
I don't think they do, but all right, fair enough.
Well, look. I mean, at the end of the day, why would you not just rent the land off the governments for a fee and put a base on it? That's way cheaper than what they're doing now.
Well, that's pretty much what they do, but yeah.
So, forget it.
No, I'm sorry, Adam. What they basically do is they go to the government and they say, I don't know, we'll build you a railway or a factory, but we want a base in return. So they're kind of running it off.
So where does the debt trap come into it?
Because when the Africans default, which they invariably do, the Chinese then say, okay, this is now Chinese sovereign territory.
So why were you arguing before then? Because that was exactly what I said.
Or maybe I misunderstood you, but that's what the Chinese do. But it's not sensible, I grant you, because like I said, the Chinese base in Djibouti will last about, I don't know, probably less than 12 hours in a war between America and China. But it's still what they're doing. And they're trying to do it in many places in Africa, including South Africa, by the way, because the ANC is very pro-Chinese.
Right, but the unsensible thing is, for example, there's a road that goes through, I forget the name of the road. There's a road that goes through Ethiopia. It's their only main highway now, I think, and it was built by the Chinese.
Yep.
And they keep having to go back there and spending inordinate amounts of money rebuilding it. And supposedly this is a bit of a political issue in China, or it has been at times, because they think it's just an enormous waste of Chinese money. And they just keep paying to rebuild this thing over and over and over again. And the Africans just trash it, and they don't care.
Sounds like an empire to me, doesn't it to you?
Yeah. But why? Why are they doing that? To me, it just seems like they're falling into the same trap that everyone does, which is that they think that they can turn Africa into something that they can't.
I'm not sure whether that's true, but it's the trap all empires fall into. It's the one the British Empire fell into. But yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you at all, mate. I just think China is as open to that shit as everybody else was.
I mean, not gonna lie. I mean, I can understand, like, for example, the British Empire especially being susceptible to like this sort of paternalistic, or if only we could take care of the Africans a lot better and all this. I mean, the Chinese, I mean, they don't particularly strike me as that sort of people, though. I mean, you're talking about people who, let's say a Chinaman runs over a kid on the street. He'll just carry on running over the kid to avoid paying for medical bills.
Yeah, no, totally true, Mitch. I don't disagree with that a minute. And there is a little bit of truth in the British being paternalistic, but really most of the roads the Brits built were so our troops could move from one place to another. And the Chinese are doing those things for exactly the same reasons.
I mean, what troops do they have, though? I mean, let's say, for example, right, let's say this proposed war in West Africa. Let's say, for argument's sake, for whatever reason, it goes against France. The French engage, they lose the war. France has completely been cooked in Europe and in Africa.
France and the West.
Yeah. So, what would the point be of China investing in railways to move its troops around to screw over the Europeans in that area?
I guess you've got to wait until you see maybe like a Russian brigade arriving in a port somewhere that can then be shifted by Chinese railway. But I mean, if that happens, that makes it worthwhile.
I mean, this is a bit of a guess me. I mean, because the Russo-Chinese alliance, I mean, I'm not really an expert on this, so I don't really know the ins and outs of it. But I mean, I don't know how much of it is because either they genuinely like each other, or because it's just a marriage of convenience. Like, oh yeah, they both oppose the West.
It's a marriage of convenience, in my opinion. But yeah.
Yeah, because for example, in Africa, you generally have a situation where the Russians, they provide the muscle. So if you're some sort of like African warlord who just ousted the pro-French president, and you need some foreign muscle to help you crush some rebels or whatever, you call them Wagner PMC. So that's what the Russians do. But then if you want to build a motorway or a railway, you get the Chinaman to do it for you.
Well, there's a lot of Chinamen, isn't there? But if you can use that railway or that motorway at some stage to move a Wagner or a Russian brigade somewhere where it's needed, all of a sudden that becomes very useful. And if you look at what the Brits did in the 19th century, and I do agree that there was a certain part of the British Empire which was paternalistic and wanted to make things better for the locals. But most of the roads and railways we built were absolutely to get a British Army brigade somewhere where they were needed quickly.
Well, I can understand, let's say, before the First World War, but let's say Western Africa, sure, I can understand. But let's say Tanzania, China invests a lot of money into a country like Tanzania, but but no Western country I know of has any influence within Tanzania because it used to be a German colony. Then we took it over. You don't see, I mean, you don't really see us intervening in the place. So what use is there in China investing in railways for the sake of, let's say, troop deployments when the West is not interested in Tanzania?
Well, it's also getting the friendliness and pro-Chinese point of view from the local government.
Yeah, sure, but I'm thinking that's the thing. Like, I don't know. I mean, someone brought up an example of Zambia. Now, Zambia is known for exporting copper, which I can understand that because copper is very important for, let's say you are let's say you're a Chinese company, you're building railways in whatever country. Let's say you're building a railway in the Philippines, but you need copper for the sake of that railway. You'll get it from Zambia. So I can understand that. But let's say a country like Tanzania, I mean, from what I mean, I don't know what Tanzania exports, but I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, losing my train of thought. I mean, I don't know how much China has to depend upon Africa for the sake of resources. Because I can understand on one hand,
China's very short of resources. It has to be said. Certainly compared to Russia, China does not have all that many resources. A lot of people, big amount of land, not many resources.
Yeah, so it's like the Chinese. I mean, they're getting into like sort of Eastern Africa, for example. Like you get like Uganda, they get into Tanzania, they get into, I don't know about Kenya. I don't know. I mean, Ethiopia, as Ataman said, Djibouti, Eritrea, I think so.
Yeah,
but and but then you get countries like Angola or what else? Angola. You've got what was the other country now? I know Angola, for example. Angola, they're very tied to Russia because they send some of their military cadets to study in like Russian military academies, and it's been going that way since like the time of the MPLA back in like the 1960s, I believe, back when the Portuguese were.
I used to command a load of former Angolan soldiers who fought for the South African Defence Force and who hated the communists, but that was a long time ago. But yeah, sure.
I mean, I didn't think like I thought the Angolans would be like. I mean, it's like a UNITA lot. You're thinking of like?
Well, no, Angola used to be Portuguese up until the 70s.
Yeah, but they had a civil war straight after independence between the MPLA, who were communist,
and the communists won, and South Africa took over the anti-communist guys and made them black African soldiers in the South African Defence Force. Yes. Okay.
I thought they were separate from the SADF. I thought it was like that UNITA and Jonas Savimbi.
No, they were. Look up 32 Battalion. One of the most famous battalions in the SADF were mostly made up of black African soldiers from Angola. Originally, they changed a bit over the years. Like we got some Zulu dudes and people like that, but basically they started off as Soshan Gain soldiers from Mozambique.
So China poor agriculture. I mean, does Africa really export a lot of food though? I can't.
No.
I mean, it's like, for example, Somalia is a worst case example where they just run the land so badly that it just turns into desert.
The only thing Africa exports in large numbers is human beings.
Well, I mean, I think China would be capable of giving me material resources like the copper, for example, in Zambia, or the uranium in Niger with sophisticated equipment. Like, I think China's got the nose to do that. But like, I don't know. Let's say agriculture. I don't think Africa exports all that much because I think, like, you take for example, Somalia. Somalia is a country where it used to have a lot more agricultural land than it does now, but it just ran itself into the ground to a point where the land has become desert because it ran the farming land so badly. And I'm pretty sure a lot of the Sahel region, because I mean, there's a theory that the Sahel region of West Africa used to be a lot more fertile and it wasn't so deserted until the Africans just ran it into the ground. So I don't know what you make of it because I don't really know that in depth about Africa beyond what I've learned past few days.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, mate. If anything can be run into the ground, Africans will run it into the ground. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But that's about all I could say to that.
Just to answer Michael, lithium, that's more Bolivia. Like, Bolivia is the main lithium exporter, from what I know. Which
Like France gets somewhere between 10 and 20% of its lithium from Niger. It's not that much, but it is quite a lot.
What's the percent for uranium? It's like 20% of the uranium that the French use of their nuclear industry comes from Niger, which I'm about to think, like, on one hand, like, they wanted to use that uranium to get off from depending on Russia because what used to be was you'd have uranium mined in Kazakhstan. It would then go into, I forget the name of the city. I can't remember. It's like Novosibirsk or Chelyabinsk or some other city in Russia where that said uranium would get enriched and then exported to France. But then after the war started, of course, supply chains get upended. Like, Africa provides more resources now towards Europe, so that's perhaps one reason why the Russians are so keen to just throw a spanner in the works with, like, Niger and all this in West Africa.
This is my point, Mitch. I think this is all Russia's trying to do at the moment. I don't think they have this idea of this great Northwest African takeover. I just think they want to throw a spanner in the works of France and other European countries.
I mean, Semyonov had the idea of, like, that. What was it? Like, something like from, because he had the idea that Russia might plan for some sort of cross-continental railway going from, like, Eritrea to, I can't remember what country, Guinea, I believe, because Senegal isn't on the menu.
Yeah, no, look, I think Semyonov generally is quite intelligent when he looks at these things. I don't always totally agree with him, but in general terms, I think he's right. And when I look at this stuff in Northwest Africa today, to me, it's just the Russians throwing a spanner in the works of the French. And bear in mind, it won't just be the French. Like, there are British troops in some parts of that area. And if they can use those guys up and make them use ammunition that would otherwise go to Ukraine, well, Russia's winning, mate. And Russia's winning anyway. So, why would you not do that?
I mean, let's say Sierra Leone, for example, which, that's, Ghana as well, which used to be British colony alongside Nigeria.
Sierra Leone, Ghana, Gambia, Nigeria, all.
Wait, Gambia? I thought Gambia was a French colony.
No. Gambia was a British colony. You know how you can tell, mate, and I've been to Gambia and Senegal. You know you can tell whether you're in Gambia or Senegal? If you're in Gambia, all the little kids wear school uniforms because it used to be British. When you're in Gambia, none of them do because it used to be French. True story.
Yeah, but it's not but he's in Gambia, like, it's like a small sliver of a country completely surrounded by Senegal, I believe.
Yes.
So I would have thought, so I don't get how we kept on to that little piece of land when it was completely surrounded by French colony.
Because France couldn't beat Britain, that's why. If you
Yeah,
really
but sure,
want.
I'm just thinking like the Congress. I'm not
That's
just
why.
imagining like we mapped out. But I'm just imagining like when we mapped out the area, like why did we just keep on to this sliver of land which is completely
Because
surrounded by Great Senegal?
it controls the huge Gambia River. That's why it's called Gambia. The Gambia is this. It's a river state, as Alice Liddell says in the chat. And Britain wanted to control that river, and we did. So, and the French couldn't do anything about it, basically.
Oh, same with Nigeria then, because of River Niger, which, yeah, because I mean, I know, actually, I can't say that, but yeah,
But
I know,
yeah. Look, the British states in the British Empire states in West Africa, in terms of size, were Nigeria first, which is huge, then Ghana, then Sierra Leone, which is where the Royal Navy sent all the slaves that they freed from the transatlantic slave trade, and then the Gambia. And after World War One, Britain also got the British Camerons, which had originally been German. And these days, that's tied into the Cameroon country, although the British bit still wants independence from the French bit, because they're not really the same country. But, there we go.
Yeah, it's like, I know in the case of Niger, it's like their biggest ethnic group are the Hausa people, who make up also the biggest ethnic group in Nigeria. So I'm just thinking, for argument's sake, this sort of proposed war, I don't know how it will take place, because that's one thing about these African countries is they've not really cohered into nation states like England did between the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes.
They're not.
So how would such a war
Nigeria
work?
is really at least two countries.
More, I mean, because you have like the North, who are, of course, the Hausa people, who are mainly Muslim.
Yep.
In the middle, you've got the Yoruba people, like half Muslim, half Christian. I mean, in the south, along the coastline, which was the strongest, like, sort of presence of the Anglican Church and such, you have the Igbo people, who are more Christian.
Yeah.
Because of that, Nigeria is a situation where the northern Muslim herders, because they're pastoralists, not farmers like selling crops.
Yeah.
They just bully the Christians all the damn time. So I just don't see how Nigeria.
And when Nigeria was a British colony, most of the African soldiers the Brits recruited there were the northern dudes, because they were more warlike and scary. But
yeah, was it? I mean, I'm assuming they're the southern, more like the southern Igbo ones. They're more mercantile or something like that.
Probably, I don't know, but the Brits didn't recruit those guys as soldiers. Most of the Nigerian soldiers were horses.
Yeah, it's like I don't want to keep making everything about Russia, but I mean, so for example, in Russia, you've got two groups: the Bashkirs and the Tatars. The Tatars are stereotyped as mercantile and shy away from combat, where stereotyped that anyway. Whereas the Bashkirs are much smaller, are seen as more martial-like, so the Russian army recruits more from that group. So it's a similar dynamic in Nigeria by the sounds of it.
Would make sense. This must be the least Anglo-stream we have ever done.
Well, we had a discussion about the British defence, but it was sort of more Europe-based, wasn't it? Because, I mean, technically, we do pay over the percentage needed for NATO, but I don't know where we actually spend more money.
They include pensions in that as well, don't they, to keep the figure down?
Yeah, they do. Thank you very much, Armin. They do. They include all military pensions in British defence spending, which, of course, is ridiculous, because Britain is still paying for some World War II war widows, for God's sake. Not many, but some. It's a con. Britain doesn't spend anywhere near 2% on defence. But I mean, the other thing I wanted to bring out on this stream is that you get British nationalists, in inverted commas, turning around and saying, "Oh no, all British defence should just be on the British Isles." I'm sorry, you can't do that if you're Britain. We're an island. We're an island. and we depend on maritime trade. If you cannot defend your maritime trade coming to Britain, whether it be oil or food or whatever else it might be, if you cannot defend that, an enemy will be able to defeat Britain thousands of miles from Britain. This is why the most important British defence force, by a long way, is the Royal Navy, because that's the only force that you can use warships, submarines, and aircraft carriers with aircraft.
I was going to say, let's say the Royal Navy, wouldn't you have to have some sort of assets in the Persian Gulf area, because that's where we get most of our oil from? So you'd have to have some sort of. So you need maritime presence in that area to guarantee.
Yeah, and then of course there are the 14 British overseas colonies or overseas territories, as they're called these days, all around the world. You also have to be able to defend those. How do you do that with our navy? You can't.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like Britain Adam, I mean, he says like make ourselves self-sufficient. I mean, I remember hearing something like a few years back where they said we could actually be self-sufficient if we so wish, but that's like foods like potatoes, meat, butter, dairy, that sort of thing. But more luxury foods, shall we say, like let's say for example, sugar. We would have to. We can't grow it all the way. We'd have to import it.
Good luck growing enough sugar in Britain. Really, sugar.
Well, I would argue a sugar ban would. I would argue like not importing sugar would actually be a good thing for like the UK, but I don't know how much.
I wouldn't, because I couldn't drink coffee or tea. But I mean, if you say so. But yeah.
Well, perhaps not enough. I mean, not a shed load. If you get my point, because I'm thinking, well, I mean, this is like something which I'd relate to in that. Yeah, I mean, you take a look at like British school children, for example, who are massively oriented towards sugar because of the way diets have gone the past like 30 years or something.
Yeah, look,
that's where I'm coming from.
I am in no way in favour of people being fat, but I'm also in no way in favour of the little Englander idea of you only need to defend the Channel and the North Sea. I'm not in favour of that either. If you are Britain and you want to be a serious nation, then you have to have a big enough navy that you can defend maritime trade.
We need to be just a nation first, though.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to be a nation first. I agree totally, Armin. Like the sort of nation we used to be in the 19th century.
I mean
I'm not saying in terms of like going and conquering people, but in terms of the Royal Navy could go anywhere and do anything. And if you got a Royal Navy that was, say, 20% the size or 25% the size of the US Navy, the Americans would have to suddenly take quite big notice of what the Brits wanted.
Yeah,
because otherwise we could turn around and say, no, we're not going to support that, mate. You know, say there's a war over Taiwan. Britain could say, well, look, what is it you want to do? And if the Americans said something we didn't like, we could say, well, you're not going to get the Royal Navy then. Whereas at the moment, if there's a war over Taiwan, I guarantee you, without a single thought, that 3/4 of the Royal Navy will be out there within 3 months.
Or what do you make of that comment in chat, Duke? That you want Britain to be like the inverse version of Prussia, where it's a navy with a state.
Yeah, that'd be good. I'd agree with that. I kind of agree with that, actually, because the Royal Navy is the best thing about Britain, or used to be anyway. But yeah, but I'm kind of joking. But yeah, no, look, if Britain was to produce the navy we should have, which should be at least about 25% the size of the American Navy, at least, then we could say to the Americans, look, we'll help you if we agree with you, and if we don't, we won't. And
we'll always disagree with them on principle.
No, we could also, we could also go to people like Australia and New Zealand and Canada and say, guys, let's get together, and all of a sudden you'd have a Commonwealth Navy or navies that would be half the size of the American Navy, and all of a sudden the Americans would have to really listen. But of course, all of that is dependent on Britain and Australia and Canada and New Zealand actually getting governments that support their own people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Was
that's what I'd like to see. I don't see any sign of it at the moment, but that's what I'd like to see. And then I'd absolutely agree with a Kanzuk idea. But we'd all have to stop mass immigration, and we'd all have to have relatively nationalist governments. Don't see any sign of that whatsoever at the moment, but that would be my ideal way of going on.
Yeah.
If only you could have a pro-British, pro-Australian, pro-Canadian, pro-New Zealand prime ministers all speaking to each other and saying, well, what is it we want to happen here, as opposed to what the septics want, the septic tanks. That would be the way I would like to see things go
on. I mean, I'm just going off its angle of generally British should generally have a big navy anyway. Just because, let's say in a hypothetical where we had a big navy, but we still had some sort of problems like, young men are just spiritually lost. A navy could perform a good conduit of giving men some sense of purpose. Which, it's like for example, I don't know if anyone else in chat or stream thinks about it, but you get that image of let's say you're an Englishman born in 1600 and you could just sail to whatever corner of explore a given part of the world. I imagine you'd have that same sense if you're part of Royal Navy. You might be some young lad from Bournemouth.
The Matthew that went to Newfoundland. The first European ship that went to Newfoundland was the Matthew, wasn't it?
John Cabot.
Yeah, the Matthew was the ship.
Yeah, it's and it's not just that. You think of let's say you're an English sailor who explored, I don't know, New Zealand, for example. Because what I know about New Zealand in terms of geography, I think about the geography from Lord of the Rings, in terms of films. So I'm just imagining being an English sailor who explores that. I can just imagine the Royal Navy in an otherwise better world would be a damn good conduit for young men to just find purpose amidst the ashes of our civilization.
I also think it would be great for a Royal Navy squadron to visit Australia or Canada or New Zealand, and for the Royal Canadian, Royal Australian and Royal New Zealand Navy to do the same thing in reverse. Yeah, absolutely. I think that'd be great. I totally support all of that.
Yeah, so I don't know how viable Kanzuk would be though, because you got to think Australia, for example. I don't know so much about New Zealand, but Canada and Australia, they're just so influenced by America that even if we were to break off the chains, shall we say, or let's say become more free, let's say UK became a lot more oriented to, I don't know, but let's say we would have a more base government, a nationalist government that tried to go, okay, look, America, if our alliance with America takes a different relationship compared to what it is now, where we have more sway, more independence of action, and so on, you'd still suffer with the fact that Canada and Australia, especially, are just still subjected to the American empire.
But Mitch, the point I'm trying to make to you is that, at the moment, if you look at the detestable Australian Labor Prime Minister, the detestable New Zealand Prime Minister, and the utterly detestable Canadian Prime Minister, to say nothing of like the Indian banker Rishi Sunak. All of those guys would have to be removed, and all of the regimes that support them. I'm not talking about something that could practically happen in, like, I don't know, even 10 years. There would have to be a total revolution in all four of those countries for this to make any sense.
Yeah. It's
I'm not pretending for a minute that any of this would work under our current system, because it won't. You need a total revolution in all four countries where you have political leaders who regard themselves as part of those nations with all their historic and blood and cultural ties and historic ties. And I would also then agree with Britain setting up a new alliance with Japan, for example, which is another country that we have much in common with.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if you saw that video earlier of like I think it was something like this black guy got deported from Japan. I can't remember for what reason, but basically he was just getting deported because I can't remember for what reason, but apparently he spoke Japanese. I don't know if you caught that, but like, and apart from deflecting,
I didn't see it, mate. Do tell me.
Yeah, it was something like this African fellow was getting deported from Japan. Apparently he spoke fluent Japanese, but for some reason he was getting deported because he committed a crime or something.
Yeah. The Japanese will always deport you if you commit a serious crime in Japan, and good on them.
Yeah, and it's like the thing is, like he was sobbing, like doing a sob story with kind of which, like, let's say a female police officer over here would just sob at, but the Japanese were having none of it. I got to ask, and this is a bit where I'm trying to make it relevant to the topic at hand, is how is Japan able to do stuff like that, knowing full well that the Americans are trying to corrupt everyone within their sphere of influence towards what America's like now? How is Japan able to have that freedom of action?
Because Japan is not a globalist nation, and the elite leadership in Japan still regards themselves overwhelmingly as Japanese. They regard themselves as elite Japanese, but they are Japanese. Whereas no one in Britain, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand who is a leadership person in any way, shape, or form regards themselves really as from that country. They don't. None of them do. The Japanese leadership does.
Yeah, this is a bit that I find interesting about Japan is it's within the sphere of influence of Japan. I mean, not Japan, of America, in the same way that Germany was put in the same sphere. However, Germany and Japan are completely different in that Germany is so cooked, so battered down. But then you got Japan, who, if I were to go over to Japan and just act like I'm a complete arsehole over there, I'll get deported within 5 minutes. No chance of appeal from me whatsoever.
100%. Japanese women, Mitch, are still feminine. And still...
Well...
Adam, how many Japanese women have you known?
2.
Right. The ones I've known, and it's considerably more than 2 now, they are much more feminine than Western women. They like looking pretty when they go out. And they don't regard themselves as blokes in skirts, nor do they mostly wear pantsuits. Japanese women are still quite feminine, pretty traditional in that regard. Certainly 100% more than average British women, nor are they very overweight. And you can look at Japanese women who are like 40 years old, and I guarantee you, mate, if they were Western chicks, you'd say, oh, no, she's about 30.
No, I think you're being very unfair. I think that's just your yellow fever speaking.
No, not true, man. Not true at all.
No, you're right.
Like Japanese women, but I don't have a yellow fever. I really don't.
You absolutely do.
No, I don't. I wish Western women were still so feminine, but they're not. I wish they were, but they're not.
This sounds like another. I mean, this is like another thing that the Americans are always saying. They're like, "Oh yeah, I went to London. They all look like the only way is Essex. Couldn't find an actual, good-looking woman anyway." It's like, yeah, whatever, dude. Like,
Well, I know I don't say that, mate. Look, I've known many very beautiful British girls, but it's harder and harder to find them.
I mean, there's not a single woman in my office, for example, that doesn't try to look pretty when she goes out. Like that's.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm not saying that, but how many of them are not overweight, mate?
I couldn't say actually. I'd have to have a count.
Yeah, thank you. Whereas, like you overweight Japanese women are like really uncommon.
And yet their birth rates and their marriage rates are even worse than ours.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet they don't have mass immigration.
No, for all the good it's doing them. But they may well do in the future. But the thing is with America is it's with Japan is it's even harder for like the State Department to infiltrate Japan.
Because of the language barrier, yeah.
Yeah, although it's even more than the language barrier for Japan, though, isn't it? There's also there's a strict cultural aversion, and of course the ethnic differences too. Like famously, Shinzo Abe was part of that organization. I can't remember what it was called.
Is that Japanese monarchist? So I don't remember.
Yeah,
I remember what you want to
be. Good.
And,
yeah, the thing is,
go on.
I was going to say, there's a clip that circulated. It went viral because of a controversy, but they were all like shouting "Tenno Hikau Banzai," which is quite controversial to the likes of Koreans and the Chinese. But in Japan, you can actually be nationalist in Japan, like towards you can even have a rising sun flag, and no Japanese person ever will bollock you like a swastika would in Germany. So
100%, and like what they're really showing here is the Japanese emperor forever, which is kind of like what I would like British people to be showing if we only had a monarch who was worth showing that over. But yeah, I got no problems with the Japanese doing that stuff.
But the thing with that organization is that organization's basically been running since World War II, and the Americans have actually tried to shut it down at various times. And like there was one particular time, I think it was in the 60s, where they literally just moved next door. And changed the name, and that was it. That was enough to get the Americans off their trail.
Yeah, and it helps that Japanese is like a totally alien language. But yeah, if you talk to most Japanese people about World War II, they have no understanding about it at all, and they don't care either. And look, I used to be, when I was a young man, because I knew blokes who had fought against the Japanese in Malaya and Burma and what have you, and been prisoners of the Japanese. I used to detest them. I really used to detest them because of how nasty they, and often it has to be said, their Korean guards were. But you know what? Modern times, things have changed. And Japan became that way after Britain rejected the Anglo-Japanese alliance in 1922. If Britain had kept that alliance instead of like kowtowing to the Americans, there is the Japanese, by everything they ever did, would have stayed loyal to it. And I don't understand why Britain didn't just keep to it, to be honest with you. I still don't understand why Britain just didn't keep to it.
I mean, this is a bit that gets me about Japan, really, is the fact that they're able to have this sort of, for example, they don't learn about World War II, like to the chagrin of all the Chinese and the Japanese, not Japanese, Koreans. They're able to have like the rising sun flag, which is a controversial thing for everyone else but the Japanese. They're able to have this sense of nationalism that's allowed in their country.
And a navy twice the size of the Royal Navy today.
Yeah, this is just a bit, is how are they able to have this sort of freedom of action where Germany was never allowed to have such freedom of action, keeping in mind that, as I said, like Japan is a mere American sphere of influence, similar circumstances to how it came to be so, and the Japanese did far crueler things towards our POWs than what the Germans did.
To our POWs, absolutely they did. But also, I would say, Japan never really was so dominated by the Americans as Germany was. They always had this different language, different culture, different history. And what Japan did very sensibly after World War II is they went back into their history and looked at the samurai era and all the rest of it. And some of my favorite films are historical Japanese movies about the samurai era.
Yeah, I need to watch more of them, to be honest.
Really, really good. Some of them are really good, even very recent ones. I'm like, yeah, all right. Adam says I got yellow fever. That's not true. But I just think there are a lot of very pretty Japanese women. But anyway, but there are a lot of very pretty Japanese women. I mean, it's just a fact. And they are feminine, and they're not into feminism. Yeah, I don't know. I quite like Japan, and if Britain ever did manage to break free from this like American death grip that we've been in since 1943 or so, if we ever broke free from that, I'd be entirely in favour of a new Anglo-Japanese alliance, particularly for Navy stuff, because I think it would make us very powerful.
Mm.
And the Japanese would support that because, in many respects, Japan is very like Britain on the far side of the world because it's a relatively small island nation that absolutely depends on maritime trade, just like Britain, which is why the original Anglo-Japanese alliance from 1902 to 1922 was such a good alliance. It was the only good alliance Britain never went into prior to World War One, because the Japanese kept their end up totally 100%. So did the Brits.
Mm.
And I would also say one other thing, mainly for Adam's benefit. Japanese girls, they're not black girls, mate. They're not, as you well know. So, they're not even Indian girls, for God's sake. And like loads of British guys liked Indian girls back in the day. But, no.
Yeah, but they're yellow, though, so,
They're not. Yellow. No, Japanese girls are pretty cute. They really, I like them.
I had a girlfriend that was half Vietnamese once, but never again.
Well, yeah, but that was probably an individual problem. Women often have individual problems, as you want.
No, she was lovely, but the whole like foreign family thing is just more trouble than it's worth. Even if you're dating like an Eastern European bird, it's just all this extra baggage of having this other family to appease. It's just more pain than it's worth.
But that would have been traditional, like in the old days in the UK, when we had like big extended families.
Yeah, but then it's a British family, so it's not as big of a deal.
God, you didn't know
the idea of like having like their family come over and you're suddenly the only English speaker in your house for like the entirety of a holiday or something. It's just not doing that.
I'd have found that quite fun to some degree. I'd have found that quite fun, so long as I like the people. You understand? Like, not if it was like a collection of Lizzos, but absolutely not that. But yeah, I don't know. I've been to weddings where 80% of the people were Afrikaans speakers in South Africa. That was all right. I didn't mind that because I was invited by the bride. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that stuff, particularly when people are polite. And I mean, that you will not find more polite people in the entire universe than Japanese. They really are very, very polite. And I watch these guys and they go, what is it everyone hates on the right about the Japanese? Japanese cartoons or something like that?
Yeah.
What's it called, Herman?
What, hentai or anime?
Hentai and anime. And like, do you know what? Most Japanese people have nothing to do with that stuff. There are a few that there are some that do, but it's mostly teenagers. You know, I went out with a Japanese girl who was in her mid-30s, shall we say, in Australia, like not so long ago, and I asked her about anime, and she said, "Yeah, that's something children do."
Yeah. This is one thing people don't realize is there's far more weebs to be found in the West who enjoy anime than actual Japanese people.
Yep.
Like, I found that out like a few years ago, but like, never think about it. It isn't that shocking. The more I think about it, because, I mean, it's well, it is what it is. Yeah, because I mean, anime. I mean, anime these days is pretty crap compared to what like, you get, like Ghost in the Shell.
I know very little about it, but this chick said to me, "That's something children do."
Well, Attack on Titan isn't going to be for kids, though.
Yeah.
And then in addition, she told me that if you go banzai, 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 you're saluting the emperor, which is actually a fact. That's all it is. You're just saying.
Tonahika Banzai, which is like Japanese war chant. It just means long live the emperor.
Yeah, it would be like saying long live King Charles. Although
it'd be like saying God.
I ain't gonna be doing that, but yeah.
Well, it's kind of like how the powers in Arnhem, their last message they wrote as "out of ammunition, God save the king." It has the same meaning as that.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. That's all it means, and I think it's cool. But look, all I would just say to people is Japan and Britain, like I said, are in many respects quite similar as being relatively powerful island nations off the mainland of their continents on opposite sides of the world. But whereas Britain has huge amounts of mass immigration and is run by an Indian banker, Japan is run by a Japanese dude who considers himself Japanese and doesn't have mass immigration. Why is that? And how are the Japanese bad compared to us?
Who's saying they are?
Oh, I'm not. Certainly not, because I quite like them. But yeah.
Well, you like the women, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm straight, mate. I've got no interest in the blokes.
I mean, the thing with like the thing with the Japanese. I mean, this is something that actually comes up a lot. Is people will say, you hear this here all the time. If you want to enact anything that's even slightly, to the right of Jeremy Corbyn on immigration policy, you'll get people screaming at you that you're a fascist, and a lot of people will try to claim we can't do that because it will damage our reputation, our global standing. But of course, loads of countries do this, and literally no one gives a fuck.
Yep.
It has no bearings at all.
Like Japan takes a very small number of genuine refugees every year. I think it's under 500, but they're all they're all
9 refugees, from what I remember.
They're all really heavily vetted and looked at. And if they're really true, then yeah, all right, Japan might take them, but it's hardly any.
Nine too many.
I mean, in the case of a Syrian,
I wouldn't take one, but you know that.
I mean, in the case of in the case of Japanese immigration, it's like 9 refugees they took from Syria. Like, it's not even double digits amount of Syrians they took in.
Good.
So,
and I bet they were only like really genuine refugees who really needed somewhere to go. And 9 is too many, but I'm very happy to see the excellent Nathan CJ Hood in the chat. Thanks, Nathan.
I thought it was on hiatus, but he seems to have come back. He did a good stream the other day.
Yeah, no, I watched that. That was an excellent stream. It's up on the Discord. Listen, I do, Nathan's one of the best British YouTubers, and I hope he doesn't stop making streams. He's a really good guy, and I like him very much. And I love his stuff about British history, tradition, legends, and myths, because those are really important. And we're talking about Japan, where that stuff is vastly important as Japanese.
I mean, I do sometimes wonder if Japan's going to be forced to do the whole immigration thing in the future.
Yeah, I keep seeing people saying this, but there's no sign that they ever have. And every time I see somebody say, "Oh no, Japan has given up and they're going to take more people," no, they don't.
I mean, we've had ministers in the past who tried to argue for mass immigration, but the government always tells them in no uncertain terms, bugger off, basically.
There is, look, again, because I've known a few Japanese women, I asked about this, and I am told there is even a Japanese term for this, where you say you're going to do something, but you don't. And I can't, for the life of me, remember what it is. It's a Japanese word. But there is a Japanese term for this, where you're basically fibbing on purpose just to let these international organizations go and get fucked. Which is the way I would like the Brits to do things as well. I wouldn't care at all if British governments turn around and said, "Oh yeah, we will take more," but actually we don't.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be my view. So yeah, all right. Anything you want to plug before we finish, gents?
No, nothing from me.
Have you been doing much on your channel, Adam? You know, where you put up your stuff from?
No, nothing at all. I do still want to do some stuff on there though, and do some stuff on my own regular channel, but we'll see.
All right, Bowden Bomber, go and check that channel out. That's the one that Adam does some work on. Mitch, anything you wanted to plug?
If people want to follow my Twitter, I'll run Anglo Gopnik. If that's the only thing I've got going on. But yeah.
Cool, no worries. Look, I did a stream a few days ago on Wellington's military career, and I think we covered Wellington in India pretty thoroughly, but we didn't do much on Wellington and the Peninsula because my fault entirely. We drifted off into like 19th century politics, etc., which was not really what I wanted to discuss on that stream. So we will do another stream on the Peninsula War rather than just Wellington. The next.
I was going to say, I mean, because I didn't attend that stream on, because I didn't really know much about Wellington in India, but I'm open to doing that Peninsula War one because I know a lot more about Peninsula War. So
you'd be more than welcome on that, mate. I mean, you and Alan are welcome on any stream I ever do, but I mean, you know, but yeah, you'd be more than welcome on that. But yeah, I will do a stream on the Peninsular War at some stage to make up for that. Apologies, entirely my fault. The next stream I have absolutely planned is going to be on Nelson's naval career, but I'm also working on a stream with Red Hawk and what's his
Mr.
name?
Streets.
Mr. Streets, who was on UO last week, on getting a girlfriend, because unless you can get a girlfriend, it's pretty hard to get a wife. So anyway, that's going to be on that one. So and those I've done streams before with Red Hawk, who is a nice bloke, and Lady Shlott, for example, is she likes Red Hawk. He's a good bloke, and he is a good bloke. And Mr. Streets, I thought was great. He's a Brit guy who's in the Middle East at the moment, who's got a load of get up and go. Yeah, I don't really care. Nathan C.J. Hood is so correct about this. Unless you can do an arranged marriage, you kind of have to get a girlfriend before you can get a wife, all right? So, and this is the thing I think people sometimes get wrong about PUAs like Red Hawk, etc. Is Red Hawk doesn't tell you what you got to do once you get a girl. You know, you can spin plates if that's what you want, but if you want a wife, you kind of have to get a girlfriend first, because she's not going to marry you unless she's your girlfriend. So yeah, all right. So I'm going to do that as well. I'm not sure when that's going to be yet, because I'm negotiating with the chaps who are going to do the stream. Thank you very, very much for Alan and Mitch for joining me this evening. We'll see you next week for Splendid Isolation 135. Might maybe do the I've also supposedly got to do a War of 1812 stream, which I might even do next week. We'll see how we go. And if I can get one other person to join me on it, we'll see. I'm gonna play. Sorry,
I was just gonna say, if it boils down to it, I'll come on that War of 1812 stream, but I don't know much beyond after. Is he named Isaac Brock? I believe his name was. Who defended Canada?
Great.
Yeah, I don't remember.
British general who defeated an American assault on Canada. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember. I remember the battles up to him, where he. I can't remember. Was it Battle of Queenstown Heights where he fell in battle, or
Sounds right. Sounds right.
Yeah, and then, but after that, I don't really know much of a war beyond generic stuff like burning the White House and Battle of New Orleans. So I'd have to research more War of 1812.
The War of 1812 is strange because the only bits you hear about are the very early naval bits when the Americans won 2 frigate actions with vastly more powerful frigates than the Royal Navy frigates they defeated. And the very end of it, which was actually after the peace was signed in 1814, when the Brits lost in New Orleans. Funny that, isn't it? It's almost like the Americans have this bias to be pro-American. But anyway, when we do our stream, we will tell the truth.
I mean, the War of 1812 just looks to me like it just became a stalemate because we couldn't bring our full force to bear due to Napoleon. But had we done so, then America would have probably lost New England because New England didn't want the war. And I won't be surprised if they were willing to be part of the British Empire just to screw over the Yankees who were pro-war or whatever. But that's just
it was a bit complicated. Eventually, like a load of the Royal Navy arrived over in American waters, and all American trade was stopped. All American warships were either captured or blockaded, and the Americans people were screaming for peace. But then, of course, Napoleon escaped, and that made things a little bit more difficult. But yeah. Michael, 19th century fan, says, hang on. The Brits burning Washington, the Star Spangled Banner. The Brits burnt Washington because the Americans burnt a Canadian town in reprisal. But we only burnt the public buildings, not the private ones. And I don't know if it's still true. But if you go to the British Army Museum in Shelby, you used to be able to see several American regimental colours that the Brits captured before they burnt Washington. I don't know if it's still true, but you used to be able to when I was a kid.
I mean, that more than proves that we won the war, really, because they burned down like a random Canadian town, so we then burned the capital. I mean, that's got counted as like I mean, come on. It's like the same when the French argue that we're pussies because we surrendered at Singapore. Meanwhile, they surrendered 2 million men to the Germans in World War II, and don't reflect on that. So,
well, I mean, also to be fair, the battle before the burning of Washington D.C. was a place called Bladensburg. And the British called it the Bladensburg Races because it was a battle where it was like how quickly the Americans could run away compared to the British advancing. And that was before we burnt Washington, D.C. But I'm not a particularly pro-American dude. I like some American people. There are some very, very, very good American people. But I ain't no friend of the American government. Anyway, unless anyone's got any final thoughts, I'm going to play us out of a tune.
Yeah, nothing from me.
No, nothing from me either.
Cool. I'll play us out of a tune then. Okay, that was Iron Duke, which is a tune about the fabulous British General Field Marshal Wellington. Guys, can you do me a favour? If you cannot send us a super chat on Odyssey, Entropy, I beg your pardon, can you let me know? Because I'm not sure if it's working at the moment, to be honest with you. Vex Peril says English, not British. Look, I'm an Englishman, mate, as far as I'm concerned, but I am English, Irish, with some Welsh and Scottish, and I would say that is most British people, to be honest with you. But we're all very, very closely related genetically anyway. But yeah. So anyway, guys, if you can't send us a super chat on Entropy, can you let me know either here or on Discord or even on Twitter? Because I'm not sure you can at the moment, but I'm just trying to figure out. Ah, okay. Alice is saying she had trouble. All right, there you go. Everyone is not British. Rex Pearl, only people from Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and a few other places are. But mostly it's British, Canadian, Australian, and New Zealanders who are British. So there you go. Totally agree, Ash and Duke. So there you go. But yeah, anyway, let me know about that, guys, because I speak to the people on Discord who run Entropy, and most of them are good guys, but they have been having problems. There you go. All right, guys, that'll do us for now. Check us out for our next streams, and please do subscribe and like to the channel and like the stream.